No food, no water. Only the Apache widow's milk kept the dying cowboy alive in the desert. Eli Matthews, a rugged cowboy with sun-baked skin and calloused hands, sat on his horse, scanning the horizon. The heat of the morning was already pressing down, promising a harsh day ahead. Eli had faced deserts before, but this stretch of Arizona felt different. There was a strange emptiness in the air, a silence so deep it seemed to press against his ears. Even the wind, usually a companion that brought cool relief, felt heavy and oppressive. Eli had set out that morning with a purpose. He was transporting a small herd of horses to a distant ranch, a journey he had undertaken many times in his life. The work was demanding, yes, but it was also familiar and comforting. The rhythm of the desert, the way the horses moved, the sound of their hooves on dry soil, it was a language Eli knew well. Yet, as he rode farther, a growing unease began to settle in his chest. The trails he had followed countless times before seemed harder, the landmarks more distant. Water sources he relied on were either dry or hidden under the unforgiving sun, and the few shade trees offered little protection from the heat. The sun climbed higher, and the desert became a vast, shimmering expanse of gold and brown. Eli's throat was dry, but he ignored the thirst at first. He had endured heat and fatigue many times, and he trusted that he could push through. Still, he found himself slowing, the weight of the day pressing down like a heavy blanket. His horse, a strong and patient animal named Dusty, moved steadily but seemed to sense the change in his rider. Every step was a small effort, each breath a struggle. Sweat soaked Eli's shirt and stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. He had to keep going. By late morning, the first real signs of trouble appeared. Eli's vision flickered at the edges, and a sharp headache began to throb behind his eyes. His lips were cracked, and his mouth felt like sandpaper. Each swallow was difficult, and his stomach churned with a hunger that gnawed deeper with every passing hour. The horses seemed restless, picking at the dry scrub and glancing around nervously. Eli knew they needed water soon, or they would weaken alongside him. He scanned the horizon again, hoping to spot a distant spring or even a small patch of green, but the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Hours passed. The sun climbed to its peak, burning relentlessly, and the heat shimmered off the sand, creating illusions that made distant rocks appear to move. Eli's pace slowed even more. His legs ached, and his arms felt heavy from holding the reins. Dusty snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing his rider's exhaustion. The horses in the herd began to scatter slightly, moving toward sparse patches of grass. Eli called to them, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. He realized that he could not keep up much longer. By mid-afternoon, Eli's situation had become critical. His water supply was nearly gone, and the small food rations he carried were untouched but useless against the overpowering heat and thirst. He had underestimated the desert, as even experienced cowboys sometimes did. The isolation, the endless sand and rocks, and the blazing sun had created a force far greater than he had anticipated. Each step became a test of willpower. The sweat pouring from his body left him exhausted, his muscles trembling with every movement. His mind wandered to thoughts of home, to a time when he had sat by a fire with friends, laughing and sharing stories. Those memories felt distant now, like echoes from another life, but they gave him a small measure of comfort. Around mid-afternoon, Eli made the decision to stop and rest under a sparse mesquite tree. Its shadow was small, barely enough to shelter him from the sun, but it was all he could find. He dismounted slowly, his legs shaking, and leaned against the rough bark. Dusty stood nearby, nuzzling him gently, sensing the depth of his weakness. Eli's head drooped, and his eyes struggled to focus. The thirst was unbearable, a burning emptiness that consumed every thought. He tried to drink from his canteen, but only a few drops remained. Even that small amount felt like a luxury, but it was not enough to revive him. As the afternoon stretched on, Eli felt a strange detachment from the world around him. The desert seemed to stretch infinitely, with no end, no relief. The horses wandered closer to him, their movements sluggish, mirroring his own exhaustion. Eli's breathing became shallow and uneven. He realized with a creeping sense of fear that he was not prepared for this level of danger. For the first time in his life, he felt truly helpless. He thought about the stories of travelers who had vanished in these very deserts, never to be seen again. The desert had claimed many, some due to pride, others due to simple misfortune. Eli's pride had carried him this far, but now he understood that survival depended on more than skill or courage. It required luck, knowledge, and sometimes the help of others. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. The temperature began to drop slightly, but the danger was far from over. Eli knew that the night would bring its own challenges: cold temperatures, the threat of wild animals, and the difficulty of navigating in darkness. He needed to regain strength, but he had nothing left to give. His eyes closed for a brief moment, seeking rest, but the heat and dehydration allowed no peace. Just as despair began to take hold, a movement in the distance caught his eye. A figure appeared, moving with careful steps, seemingly at ease in the harsh desert. Eli squinted, unsure if he was seeing things clearly. The figure approached slowly, and as it drew nearer, Eli realized it was a woman. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the desert as if she belonged to it. There was a calmness about her, an understanding of the land that Eli could sense even from a distance. The woman approached and knelt beside him without hesitation. Her presence brought a strange sense of relief. She offered him water, and though it was only a small amount, it felt like a lifeline. Eli drank greedily, feeling the first real relief he had known in hours. The woman spoke in a calm, steady voice, though Eli could not fully understand her words. It was enough that she was there, that she had come to help. The woman, an Apache widow named Aeon, had been observing the desert and knew its dangers intimately. She had lived there for years, surviving through knowledge, skill, and resilience. She recognized the signs of extreme dehydration and exhaustion in Eli. He was on the brink of collapse, and without immediate care, he might not survive the night. Aeon had helped many in her time, and she knew what had to be done. Eli leaned back against the tree, too weak to speak, too drained to move. The desert that had seemed endless and threatening now felt slightly less hostile, as if her presence alone could push back the danger. Though he had been proud, relying only on his strength and skill, Eli now understood the limits of human endurance. Survival required more than effort. It required guidance, care, and sometimes the selflessness of strangers. As the afternoon waned into evening, Eli's thoughts grew hazy. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, his body sinking into weakness, but he also sensed a faint glimmer of hope. The woman's steady presence, her calm movements, and the water she offered gave him the strength to endure a little longer. For the first time in hours, Eli allowed himself to relax, to rest, and to trust that he might survive this ordeal. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but it had also brought him to someone who could help. Eli did not know yet that his life would depend on more than water and shade. That survival would require him to accept help in a way he had never imagined. For now, though, he remained under the mesquite tree, leaning against the rough bark, feeling the slow return of life in his body. The desert had tested him, and though he had almost succumbed, a new chapter in his journey was about to begin. Eli's eyes slowly fluttered open as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The heat of the day had softened into a gentler warmth, though the desert was still unforgiving. His body felt weak, almost lifeless, and every breath was a labor. He tried to sit up but found his arms trembling and his legs too shaky to support him. His throat burned, and even the small sip of water he had taken from the Apache woman earlier had only given temporary relief. For the first time, Eli realized how close he had come to death. The desert, which he had once thought of as a challenge to his skill and endurance, now seemed like a merciless force, testing the limits of human survival. The woman, Aeon, watched him carefully. Her eyes were calm, yet full of awareness. She had seen travelers die in these conditions before, and she knew that Eli's situation required more than just water. His body needed nourishment, his spirit needed encouragement, and his survival depended on trust that had been nearly impossible for a proud cowboy like him. Aeon approached him gently, offering another small sip of water. This time she remained close, speaking softly in her language. Eli did not understand her words, but the tone was soothing, filled with kindness and a quiet authority that demanded attention. Aeon quickly assessed the situation. She knew that if Eli were to survive, he needed more than just the water she had given him. His muscles were cramping, his energy completely drained, and the chances of him walking out of the desert on his own were slim. She glanced at the horses, who were also showing signs of exhaustion, and then back at Eli. She realized that he would need nourishment, immediate and unusual, to restore strength to a body that was near collapse. In her culture, there was knowledge passed down from elders. The milk of a nursing mother could provide remarkable strength and life-giving energy to someone in extreme weakness. Though it was an unconventional solution for a stranger, Aeon understood that survival sometimes required difficult choices. Eli's head lolled to one side as he struggled to speak, his pride warring with the reality of his condition. He was a man used to relying on his own skills and endurance, but now he faced the humbling truth that he was powerless without help. Aeon sensed his fear and hesitation. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder, steadying him, and offered him a reassuring look. There was no judgment in her eyes, only the understanding of someone who had lived with hardship and known the delicate balance between life and death in the desert. Slowly, she administered her milk to Eli, carefully ensuring he received enough to strengthen his weakened body. At first he hesitated, embarrassed and confused, but the desperation in his body overpowered his pride. Each small sip brought a subtle but immediate change. Color began to return to his pale face, his eyes regained a hint of focus, and his muscles, though still weak, stopped trembling as violently. It was as though life was flowing back into him, drop by drop, through a source he could never have imagined. As the evening progressed, Aeon stayed close, monitoring Eli's condition. She moved with a quiet efficiency, tending to his minor injuries, brushing away sand and speaking softly to calm his fears. Eli, though still weak, began to realize that this woman had saved him from the brink of death. The desert, which had seemed so vast and merciless, had brought him to someone who knew it intimately, someone whose courage and wisdom could rival the harshness of the land itself. The night began to fall, and with it came the desert's chill. The temperature dropped quickly, and the wind carried a sharp edge. Eli shivered, the weakness in his body leaving him vulnerable to the sudden cold. Aeon built a small fire from dry brush, careful to keep it contained while providing warmth. She guided Eli to sit close, shielding him from the wind and wrapping him in a blanket she had carried. The simple act of care, the warmth of the fire, and the steady presence of someone who understood the desert's dangers all combined to create a sense of safety that Eli had not felt in hours, perhaps days. Through the night, Eli drifted in and out of consciousness. When he stirred, Aeon was there, offering water, warmth, and quiet encouragement. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and humility, emotions unfamiliar to a man who had long relied on his own strength and pride. He realized that survival was not just a test of physical endurance. It was also a test of trust, of letting go of ego and accepting help when it was desperately needed. By morning, Eli's condition had improved slightly, though he remained weak. He could stand with assistance, and his voice had returned enough to speak a few words. He thanked Aeon, though he knew words could never fully express the depth of his gratitude. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a reminder of how close he had come to death, but now it seemed less threatening with Aeon's presence. She prepared a small meal from herbs and roots she had gathered, simple but nourishing, to help him regain strength. Over the next several days, Aeon's care continued. She taught Eli how to find water hidden under rocks and in small desert springs, showing him signs that he had overlooked. She instructed him on which plants could be eaten and which were dangerous. Every lesson was a reminder of how little he knew, how vulnerable he had been, and how much he still had to learn. Eli listened carefully, absorbing her knowledge, humbled by her wisdom and grateful for her patience. Eli's recovery was slow, but it was steady. Each day brought a small improvement. His strength returned a little, his skin regained some color, and his mind grew clearer. Aeon encouraged him to move carefully, reminding him that rushing could undo all the progress he had made. She spoke little of her own life, yet through her actions, Eli sensed her resilience and the hardships she had endured. Her life in the desert had been one of solitude and survival, and now she had chosen to extend her skills and care to a stranger in need. During their time together, Eli reflected on his own journey and mistakes. He had always believed that strength came from self-reliance, from enduring hardship alone, but the desert had taught him otherwise. He realized that sometimes survival required humility, acceptance, and the courage to receive help when it was desperately needed. Aeon's actions were a lesson in humanity, compassion, and quiet strength. One afternoon, as the sun began to set in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Eli sat with Aeon, watching the horses graze slowly on the sparse desert grass. He felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the woman who had saved his life, but to the land itself, harsh and beautiful, demanding and giving in equal measure. For the first time, he truly understood the wisdom that came from living close to the desert, respecting its rules, and embracing the strength found in community and care. As days passed, Eli began to regain the ability to move with more confidence. His steps became steadier, his voice stronger, and his energy slowly returned. Aeon continued to guide him, always patient, always watchful. Eli's gratitude grew with each passing moment, and he knew that he would carry the lessons of this time with him forever. He had been given a second chance, a gift of life from someone whose bravery and kindness went beyond what words could express. By the end of the week, Eli was able to mount Dusty again and ride short distances with Aeon guiding him. The desert, once a place of danger and near death, had become a place of learning and transformation. Eli understood that the true measure of survival was not only in enduring hardships, but in recognizing the help and guidance of those who had the knowledge and courage to offer it. As they prepared to continue the journey, Eli looked at Aeon with deep respect. She had given him life when it seemed almost impossible, teaching him lessons of resilience, humility, and trust that he would carry for the rest of his life. The desert, with all its trials, had forged a connection between them, an unspoken bond of survival, gratitude, and mutual understanding. Eli's journey had been saved by the courage and wisdom of a woman who knew the desert better than anyone else, and he knew that he would never forget her, nor the lessons she had imparted. The desert stretched endlessly under the mid-morning sun, a vast expanse of sand, rocks, and sparse vegetation. Eli Matthews had regained some strength after days of Aeon's care, but he was still far from fully recovered. Every step he took was deliberate, every movement measured. Dusty, his loyal horse, seemed to understand his caution, moving slowly alongside him. The herd of horses followed at a distance, grazing on the small patches of desert grass Aeon had taught Eli to recognize. Though the immediate danger of death had passed, the desert remained an unforgiving place. Eli had learned that survival was never guaranteed, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Aeon walked beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. She moved with confidence across the desert, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain for hidden dangers. She taught Eli to read the signs of the land, the faint tracks of animals in the sand, the subtle differences in plant growth that indicated nearby water, and the shifting winds that signaled approaching weather changes. Eli listened carefully, absorbing every detail, knowing that these lessons were now essential to his survival. Each lesson was a reminder of how little he had truly understood about the desert before. Despite his growing knowledge, Eli faced moments of intense struggle. His body was still weak, and the memories of near death haunted him. The heat of the sun pressed down, and the dry air sucked moisture from his throat and skin. Every sip of water felt precious, yet he had learned to ration it carefully under Aeon's guidance. He had never realized how delicate the balance of survival could be. Too much effort, and his body could collapse. Too little, and he risked being trapped by the harsh environment. The desert had become both a teacher and a challenge, demanding constant attention and respect. One afternoon, as the sun reached its highest point, Eli began to feel a familiar weakness creeping through his limbs. He stopped abruptly, gripping Dusty's reins for support. His vision blurred, and he felt a wave of dizziness. Aeon immediately noticed the signs, her eyes narrowing with concern. She approached him quickly, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Easy," she said softly, her tone calm but firm. Eli tried to respond, but his voice came out as a weak croak. He realized that despite his recovery, his body was still fragile. Aeon assessed the situation carefully. She knew that Eli needed more than water now. He needed nourishment and rest. She guided him to a small patch of shade under a lone mesquite tree. There, she helped him dismount and settle onto the soft sand. Eli's pride struggled against the reality of being dependent on someone else, but the desert had taught him humility. He had no choice but to accept her help. As he rested, Aeon prepared a small meal from roots and herbs she had gathered, carefully arranging them so that he could eat without straining himself. The food was simple but nourishing, designed to give him energy without overwhelming his still recovering body. As he ate, Eli reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had set out with confidence, believing in his skill and endurance, only to be humbled by the desert's relentless power. He realized that pride, which had once been a source of strength, could also be a dangerous weakness. Survival required more than physical ability. It required awareness, patience, and the willingness to learn from others. Aeon had shown him this through her quiet guidance and tireless care. Her presence was more than comforting. It was life-saving, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, compassion and knowledge could overcome danger. After the brief rest, Aeon led Eli further into the desert, showing him a small hidden spring she had discovered during her years of living in the area. The water was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the small sips they had managed before. Eli knelt beside the spring, drinking deeply, feeling his strength return with every swallow. The relief was immediate and profound. For the first time since his collapse, he felt a flicker of hope that he could continue the journey and eventually reach safety. However, the desert was not done testing him. As they moved forward, a sudden sandstorm began to rise on the horizon. The wind howled, whipping sand into their faces and stinging their skin. Eli struggled to keep his footing, feeling the exhaustion in his muscles and the weight of the day pressing down. Aeon remained calm, guiding him step by step, shielding him from the worst of the wind and directing the horses to safer ground. Her knowledge of the land allowed them to find a narrow canyon where the storm's force was lessened. There, they waited out the worst of it, huddled together for protection. During the storm, Eli had time to think deeply. He realized that he had taken for granted the skills and wisdom that allowed people to survive in the desert. Aeon had lived in this harsh environment for years, and her knowledge had become instinctual. Every action she took was calculated, every movement purposeful. In contrast, Eli had relied on his own limited experience and pride, almost paying the ultimate price. The storm became a symbol of the challenges he had faced, a reminder that survival was not a solitary endeavor but often a shared effort, dependent on trust and guidance. When the storm finally passed, the desert seemed quieter, almost serene. Eli rose slowly, feeling the regained strength in his limbs. Dusty neighed softly, shaking off the sand, and the herd of horses moved closer, sensing their riders' renewed energy. Aeon led them out of the canyon, teaching Eli to recognize the subtle signs of safe paths, hidden water, and natural shelters. Each step forward was a lesson in observation, patience, and adaptation. Eli felt a growing sense of respect for her and for the desert itself, understanding that both demanded careful attention and humility. As evening approached, they reached a small oasis Aeon had discovered long ago. Palm trees offered shade, and a small pool of water reflected the fading sunlight. Eli knelt beside the pool, drinking deeply, feeling the last traces of weakness leave his body. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel gratitude without reservation. He realized that he had survived not only because of his own endurance, but because of Aeon's courage, skill, and unwavering care. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. The desert was both a harsh teacher and a generous provider, and survival required respect, knowledge, and sometimes reliance on the kindness of others. That night, as they camped near the oasis, Eli and Aeon shared a quiet moment. Though words were few, Eli still struggled with language and pride. They understood each other through gestures and shared experiences. Aeon offered him food and water, and he accepted, feeling a deep sense of humility. He realized that survival was not only about strength, but also about connection, empathy, and trust. The desert had forced him to confront his limitations and to recognize the value of human compassion. Eli reflected on how close he had come to death, and the fear of that near loss remained with him, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Yet, alongside that fear was a growing sense of determination. He had been given a second chance, a gift from someone who had nothing to gain but the satisfaction of saving a life. He vowed silently to honor that gift, to carry forward the lessons he had learned, and to respect the desert and its people in a way he never had before. The days that followed were filled with steady progress. Aeon continued to teach Eli about the desert's secrets, how to find food and water, how to navigate using the sun and stars, and how to recognize signs of danger long before they became threats. Eli's body grew stronger, his movements more confident, and his mind sharper. Yet he never forgot the weakness he had felt, the desperation that had brought him to Aeon's care, or the profound lesson that survival was a shared effort. By the end of Part 3, Eli had transformed. He was no longer just a cowboy testing his limits. He was a man who understood the delicate balance of life in the desert. He had faced death, accepted help, and learned to trust another human being in a place where pride alone could not save him. Aeon had become more than a guide. She was a teacher, a protector, and a symbol of the strength and compassion that could flourish even in the harshest environments. The desert, once a place of near-death and isolation, had become a school of life, teaching Eli lessons he would carry forever. And as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Eli understood that his journey was far from over, but he would face the future with newfound respect, humility, and the knowledge that true strength often came from the courage and care of others. The desert seemed quieter now, as if it had accepted Eli's presence and his slow return to strength. But the calm was only temporary, for survival in this vast land demanded constant vigilance. Eli Matthews had regained considerable energy thanks to Aeon's care, yet the desert continued to test his endurance, patience, and understanding of its ways. He walked carefully alongside Dusty, his loyal horse, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from the long journey and the harsh sun. The herd of horses followed closely, grazing on the sparse vegetation Aeon had taught him to recognize. Aeon's presence remained steady, a quiet anchor in a land that could so easily destroy the unwary. She moved confidently, scanning the horizon for danger, guiding Eli with gentle instruction. "See that line of rocks?" She pointed toward a faint ridge in the distance. "It will lead us to a spring, but move slowly and watch your footing." Her words were calm, but carried an authority that Eli respected more than he could admit. He had once relied solely on his own experience, believing he could overcome any challenge, but the desert had proven him wrong. Now he understood that knowledge, patience, and humility were just as essential as strength. As the day wore on, Eli began to feel the familiar weakness creeping back into his body. His chest ached, and his legs felt like lead. Sweat poured from him despite the cooler temperature, a reminder of the lingering effects of dehydration and exhaustion. Aeon noticed immediately, placing a hand on his shoulder to steady him. "Rest," she said softly. Eli's pride wanted to argue, but he had learned that refusal could cost him his life. He sank to the sand gratefully, leaning back against Dusty's side, and allowed himself to rest while Aeon tended to the herd. During the pause, Eli reflected on how far he had come. He remembered the moment he had first collapsed under the scorching sun, feeling near death and completely powerless. He had thought he could rely solely on his skill and courage, but the desert had shown him otherwise. Aeon had saved him, teaching him lessons that went far beyond survival. She had shown him patience, wisdom, and the importance of trust and compassion. Every moment in her presence was a lesson in resilience, humility, and human connection. After a short rest, Aeon helped him to his feet and guided him toward the hidden spring she had discovered. The water was clear and cool, a gift in the middle of the arid land. Eli drank deeply, feeling his strength returning with each swallow. For the first time, he began to understand that survival required not only physical endurance, but also careful observation, strategy, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Aeon's teachings had transformed him from a man relying solely on strength and pride into someone capable of learning, adapting, and respecting the land. Despite the growing bond between them, Eli faced moments of doubt and fear. His body still had limits, and the desert had a way of reminding him of them. One afternoon, as they traveled toward another water source, a sudden steep slope appeared in their path, loose rocks sliding under Dusty's hooves. Eli felt panic rising in his chest as he struggled to maintain balance. The herd began to scatter, startled by the sudden instability of the ground. Aeon acted quickly, moving to guide both Eli and the horses with calm precision. "Steady," she instructed, positioning herself to block potential hazards. "Take it slow, one step at a time." Eli obeyed, though fear and exhaustion gripped him. He realized in that moment that his pride had often blinded him to danger in the past. He had rushed into challenges without fully understanding the risks, relying solely on his confidence. Now, under Aeon's careful guidance, he was learning that patience and caution could be just as powerful as courage. Each step he took was deliberate, each breath measured, as he followed her instructions and regained control over his body and his fear. That night, as they camped near a small oasis, Eli sat quietly by the fire while Aeon prepared a modest meal. He watched the flames dance, reflecting on the lessons of the past days. He thought about the near-death experience that had brought him to this point, and the life-saving care he had received from a woman who had nothing to gain. A deep sense of gratitude filled him, tempered by humility. Eli realized that he had been arrogant, assuming he could conquer the desert alone, but survival often depended on the selflessness and knowledge of others. During the evening, Aeon spoke quietly of her own life. Though she had lost her husband years earlier, she had survived by learning to read the desert, to understand its patterns, and to respect its dangers. Her words were few but meaningful, conveying the resilience, patience, and quiet strength she had cultivated over years of solitude. Eli listened attentively, feeling a growing respect and admiration. He understood that her survival was not a matter of luck but of skill, courage, and wisdom. Her actions had saved his life, and her guidance continued to shape his recovery. Over the next few days, Eli's recovery progressed steadily. He gained strength, confidence, and a deeper understanding of the desert. Aeon taught him how to find hidden water, recognize edible plants, and navigate using the sun and stars. Every lesson was practical, immediate, and potentially life-saving. Eli began to internalize these teachings, understanding that knowledge, observation, and adaptability were crucial to survival. The desert had become a teacher, and Aeon its guide, revealing secrets that Eli had never noticed in his years of wandering alone. Yet even with growing strength, challenges remained. The desert tested him with steep climbs, sudden sandstorms, and the constant threat of dehydration. Eli's body still struggled with fatigue, and there were moments when fear and doubt crept in. During one such moment, he paused on a rocky ledge overlooking a dry canyon. The heat was intense, the terrain difficult, and he felt the familiar weakness pressing against him. Aeon stood nearby, offering water and a calm presence. "You can do this," she said softly. "Trust yourself in the land, move carefully but move forward." Eli followed her advice, taking deliberate steps along the rocky path. He felt his muscles protesting, his heart pounding, but he continued. Slowly, steadily, he made it across the ledge, guided by her knowledge and reassured by her confidence. In that moment, he realized the depth of her wisdom and the trust required to survive in such an unforgiving place. He had learned that strength alone was not enough. Survival depended on awareness, patience, and the willingness to accept guidance when needed. As they set up camp that evening, Eli reflected on the transformation within himself. The desert had been a harsh teacher, forcing him to confront his limitations, fear, and pride. Aeon had not only saved his life, but had also guided him toward understanding, humility, and respect for the land. He realized that survival was not merely a test of endurance. It was a journey of learning, adaptation, and connection. Each day, he felt more capable, more aware, and more deeply grateful for the woman who had given him a second chance. By the fourth night, Eli had regained most of his strength. He could walk longer distances, navigate the terrain with confidence, and even tend to the horses with Aeon's guidance. Yet he never forgot the fragility of life in the desert, nor the lessons he had learned about trust, humility, and compassion. The bond between him and Aeon had deepened into mutual respect and understanding, forged in the crucible of survival. They shared quiet moments around the fire, exchanging gestures, knowledge, and an unspoken appreciation for each other's courage and skill. As the fire crackled, Eli thought about the life he had left behind, the confidence, pride, and self-reliance that had once defined him. Now, those traits had been tempered by humility, awareness, and the understanding that survival often required help from others. Aeon had not only preserved his life, but had also reshaped his perspective, showing him that true strength included patience, observation, and empathy. Eli knew that his journey was far from over. The desert still stretched ahead, with its dangers and challenges, but he no longer faced it with fear alone. He had learned to respect its power, to recognize its patterns, and to rely on both his own growing skill and the wisdom of someone who had mastered it. Survival was no longer a solitary endeavor. It was a shared effort, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The sun rose over the desert, casting a golden light across the sand and rocks. Eli Matthews felt a strength in his body he had not known for weeks. Each muscle moved with ease, each breath was steady, and his mind was alert. He looked over at Dusty, who nickered softly, and then at the herd of horses, grazing quietly near the sparse vegetation. After days of struggle, lessons, and careful guidance from Aeon, he was finally ready to continue his journey across the vast desert. Aeon moved beside him, her presence calm and reassuring. She had been with him every step of the way, guiding, teaching, and caring for him. Though words between them had been few, their shared experiences had created a bond deeper than language could convey. Eli understood now that survival was not only about physical endurance, it was about trust, respect, and the willingness to accept help when needed. He had learned humility, patience, and the importance of observing the world around him with care. The morning was quiet, broken only by the soft sounds of the desert, the wind rustling through scrub, the distant calls of birds, and the gentle shuffle of the horses' hooves. Aeon pointed out landmarks and hidden signs in the terrain, showing Eli subtle features he would have passed by without notice. A tiny patch of greenery indicated water underground, a particular rock formation suggested a safe path, and the direction of animal tracks revealed sources of food. Eli marveled at her knowledge. She had lived in the desert for years, learning its secrets and surviving where others might perish. Her wisdom was not just practical, it was a lesson in understanding the delicate balance between life and environment. By midday, Eli felt confident enough to ride alongside Dusty without guidance. He had regained most of his strength, and the weakness that had plagued him for days was gone. The journey across the desert, once terrifying and nearly fatal, now felt like a test he could meet with patience and skill. He remembered the fear he had felt during the sandstorms, the near collapse under the blazing sun, and the exhaustion that had threatened to take his life. These memories were no longer sources of shame, but reminders of the lessons he had learned and the gratitude he owed to Aeon. As they traveled, Eli reflected on how much he had changed. He had begun this journey full of pride, believing he could face the desert alone, relying solely on his strength and courage. That confidence had nearly cost him his life. Through Aeon's care and guidance, he had learned that survival required more than self-reliance. It required observation, patience, humility, and trust in others. He realized that he would never approach the world or challenges in the same way again. The desert sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the landscape in warm, golden light. Eli knew that their journey would soon bring them to the edge of the wilderness, where the harsh desert gave way to more familiar terrain. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and deep gratitude. Relief that he had survived, pride in the strength he had regained, and gratitude for the woman who had saved him from the brink of death. Aeon guided them to a small plateau overlooking a broad valley below. The view was breathtaking, the desert stretching endlessly behind them, while the valley ahead promised easier travel and access to water and shelter. Eli took a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the air fill his lungs and the sun warm his face. He looked at Aeon, realizing that she had not only been a guide but a teacher, a protector, and a friend. The bond they had formed in the harsh wilderness was strong, born of shared struggle, trust, and mutual respect. As they prepared to leave the desert behind, Eli spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever thank you," he said. "You saved my life, taught me how to survive, and showed me a way to see this land differently. I'll never forget you." Aeon smiled softly, her expression calm but warm. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder, acknowledging his gratitude without words. In that gesture, Eli felt the depth of her understanding and compassion. Before parting ways, Aeon gave Eli one final lesson. She instructed him on how to continue finding water and food in the valley, how to remain aware of the terrain, and how to watch for signs of danger even in less harsh environments. Each piece of advice was practical but also symbolic, a reminder that life was a series of challenges that required observation, patience, and wisdom. Eli listened carefully, knowing that these final instructions would carry him safely beyond the desert and into a new chapter of life. As night approached, they camped near the edge of the valley. The stars appeared one by one, brilliant against the dark sky. Eli and Aeon shared a quiet meal, simple but nourishing, the last time they would eat together in the desert. Around the fire, Eli felt a mixture of sadness and hope. He was leaving the wilderness behind, but he carried with him the lessons and experiences that would shape the rest of his life. Aeon, silent but attentive, seemed to understand the unspoken words in his heart. The next morning, the time to part had come. Eli prepared Dusty and the herd, feeling a strange combination of excitement and sorrow. He had survived the desert, learned its secrets, and regained his strength, but he knew that he owed his life to Aeon. Without her guidance, knowledge, and courage, he might never have left the desert alive. As he mounted Dusty, he turned to her with a deep sense of gratitude and respect. "I will never forget you," he said simply. "Thank you for everything." Aeon nodded, her expression calm but filled with a quiet pride. She had given him the tools to survive, the knowledge to navigate the land, and the courage to trust in others. She had saved his life without seeking recognition, motivated only by compassion and understanding. In her eyes, Eli saw a reflection of the resilience and wisdom that had guided him through the most dangerous days of his life. As Eli rode toward the valley, the desert slowly fading behind him, he felt a sense of renewal. The journey had transformed him from a proud, self-reliant cowboy into a man who understood the value of humility, trust, and human connection. He had faced death and survived, not through strength alone, but through the guidance and care of someone who understood life in its harshest form. The lessons of the desert would remain with him forever, shaping the way he lived, traveled, and related to others. The horizon stretched ahead, promising new challenges and adventures, but Eli faced them with confidence tempered by humility. He knew the desert would always be a part of him, a teacher that had tested his limits and shown him the importance of compassion, wisdom, and trust. Aeon's influence would remain with him, guiding his decisions and shaping his understanding of the world. As he looked back one last time, Eli saw Aeon standing at the edge of the desert, a solitary figure against the vast landscape. She raised her hand in a quiet farewell, and Eli felt a rush of gratitude and respect that words could not fully express. He knew he would never forget the woman who had saved him, the lessons he had learned, or the desert that had transformed his life. The journey beyond the desert was still long, but Eli rode with renewed strength and clarity. Every step was a reminder of the struggle he had endured, the guidance he had received, and the life he had been given. He had been humbled, tested, and taught that true survival depended not only on courage and endurance, but also on trust, compassion, and the willingness to accept help from those who understood the land better than he did. As the sun set on his first evening beyond the desert, Eli felt a deep sense of peace. He had survived against incredible odds, learned lessons that would guide him forever, and discovered the strength of human connection in the most unlikely of places. The desert had been a harsh teacher, but it had given him more than survival. It had given him understanding, gratitude, and a profound respect for the resilience of others. Eli continued on his journey, carrying with him the memory of Aeon, the Apache widow who had saved his life, and the lessons of the desert that had reshaped his understanding of strength, survival, and compassion. He knew that no matter where life took him, he would never forget the woman who had shown him that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness and wisdom could conquer the impossible. And in that knowledge, he found not only survival but a sense of purpose and hope that would guide him for the rest of his life.